Hey everybody, welcome back to the Combat Chain. I am your host, Patrick. I should have bet the house on Ethan Van Sant Shaw. And with me, as always, is my co-host, Adam. CMH stands for Canadian Massacres Hayden Philipchuk. Adam, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Pat. As always, it's good to be here. Yeah, some exciting stuff coming out of the Goliath Gauntlet in the first week. Some big upsets, things I did not expect to see. Yeah, how are you?
I'm great. Yeah, the Goliath Gauntlet's really, I think people are really looking at it now, and it's bringing some of the best players in the world with questionable camera setups, but high quality gameplay. We'll talk about it later, but like has to be the upset of the century. Van Sant just takes Levia the steamroller all over Pablo Pintor. So we'll get into that a little bit, but holy crap.
Yeah.
It happened. My bracket shit the bed right there. That was it. That was
everyone's bracket was.
There's no our panel of experts are over. There's no perfect brackets left after the opening matches. One of the games yet to be played is featuring our guest this week, and he is Brendan Patrick, one of the founding fathers of the Flesh and Blood competitive scene in the U.S., being one of the genuinely earliest adopters of the game. Along with Hayden Dale, he is one half of the Arsenal Pass podcast and YouTube channel, coming up on 5,000 subscribers on YouTube. It is widely considered the number one podcast in the game. The Arsenal Pass influence can be felt far and wide across the content sphere, especially right here on this very show. You can see him in San Jose at Worlds November 4th through 6th, not as a competitor, but as a caster of the event. Brendan Patrick, welcome to the program.
How y'all doing tonight?
Fired up. Thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it. It's been an exciting weekend of kind of flesh and blood action, and we're of course happy to have you on.
Yeah, the Ethan Van Sant upset. I actually had the pleasure of playing against Ethan in Pro Tour number 2, and I think I said this on the Arsenal Pass podcast, and I don't mean it in a bad way. It is 100% complimentary, but I did not expect him to be as good as he was. I thought, plays Levia. It's kind of just, it's a pet deck, but I played him in PT number 2. He was on Levia, but legitimately a very cognizant player, very aware of everything that was going on, was tracking sort of the, my card, not only the cards that could potentially be in my hand, but very aware of my graveyard, my pitch, and exactly what my deck was trying to do. I was actually quite impressed. So Ethan Van Sant with the upset over Pablo Pintor. Well, I'm surprised because it's Levia. I am not surprised that it's Ethan Van Sant.
Ethan really does not get enough credit for his acumen in the game. His early stream, so he's been streaming Talishar right weekly. Now he was getting ready for PT, getting ready for US, getting ready. Now he's getting ready for Worlds. His prep for US Nats on Fi actually helped me become a better Fi player. He was just speaking out loud some of these concepts that might have seemed kind of foundational and rudimentary to him, but it was really like eye-opening at how he was talking out those individual lines and just hitting notes that not a lot of people were hitting on Fi, and it made a whole lot of sense for how he was setting up his lines and getting them out there. And it makes you wonder, if it wasn't for Levia, where would he be?
Yeah, when he gets serious about the game. It's funny when you play him in person, even at the highest level of competitive events, he does the exact same thing where he talks out not only all of his plays, but what he thinks all of your plays are as well. Just a very talkative player, just runs through the lines, and I honestly appreciate that very much, especially when it comes to clear communications. You pass through phases and priority, and just making the game state very clear. He's pretty much the sort of, he gets close to being the gold standard of that in Flesh and Blood so far. I'm sure that he's someone who's going to come into his own when it comes to, being appreciated. I do think that he is underappreciated as a competitive player right now, but, it's still early in the journey. And I think that people via the streams and now via the Goliath Gauntlet are becoming more aware.
Absolutely. We're going to dive into that and more, but before that, no one escapes the origin story. Brendan, who are you, and how the hell did you get here?
So my origin story, it's kind of funny because I actually didn't play card games before Flesh and Blood. I had played video games, so I had a bit of a gamer background, I guess. But yeah, I was back in Texas after living in Thailand for a bit. I'd come back here for sort of a medical issue, which had landed me just, I guess, back home. Yeah, I grew up here essentially, and was cruising by this card shop called Reaper Game Store, owned by Bill down here. And I think I was going to get like a dual deck to play with my partner at the time because that was like what I like to do. That was my first exposure to card games. There's a little thing called Flesh and Blood being paid, and so I just impulse bought like a couple of boxes, was opening it, played some games, put the Ira decks, and instantly hooked. Best game I've ever played. All the games felt very close, and yeah, started playing locally. Had a lot of success. I had quite the record going into Austin, which honestly did not make me very confident in me. Did the opposite, where I was like, oh wow, I'm probably reinforcing some very, very bad habits here. So yeah, I got to the calling in Austin, met James White and Sasha Markovic, introduced myself to Sasha. And that was sort of the origin story of our friendship. And we've sort of been, I guess, close to best friends for about 3 years now. But yeah, went through that tournament with him, made top 8, lost to him in the finals, and then decided to commit to playing the first constructed calling over in New Zealand. And really the rest is history after that. And via Sasha, I met Hayden Dale. And from there, we started Arsenal Pass, which was actually intended to be a limited only sort of limited resource-esque podcast, just doing set reviews and things like that. And it has grown from that original idea.
I would say so. No, it definitely is still. Your limited videos are one of the highlights. I know for both of us, it's a real treat when those come out, and it's there's not a lot out there that you guys that does it like that. Like you really hit every card in depth, credible analysis, and it is quite enjoyable.
Yeah, when we started Arsenal Pass, actually, there's pretty much genuinely no competition in fab content creation, like at all. There was another podcast called Session Blood that was just by default as being the only podcast, also just the most popular and the most successful. And they were actually hanging it up to go work at Legendary Studios, and we use that as our jumping off point to maybe get in the space. But I mean, when I talk about there being no content, like you would go on YouTube and if you searched X Hero versus X Hero, nothing would come up. Like there was nothing. So I think we got very lucky with when we got into the game because there wasn't a lot to compete with. And yeah, I think that the hardest part of any content creation is probably going to be the very beginning, getting those initial people to sort of watch or listen. And yeah, because of the way the landscape of content was at that point, we were able to sort of be a first mover in the podcast space or close to it.
No, we can definitely speak on the competition that is the content space now. It does feel like there's you're trying to make your mark, where you can and find your niche, and there's 24 other podcasts and content channels doing roughly the same numbers, kind of the same thing. How do you break out and separate yourselves is kind of where we're at the moment. You just went on a huge trip around Europe. I am curious about that trip, and if you could fill us in on some of the highlights here.
Yeah, for sure. So, obviously it started in Lille, which is probably my least favorite stop of the entire trip. Not because it's France. And I know that France gets a rap as sort of kind of being, it's France, right? But ultimately Lille was just, it was a little warm. I had never been to Europe in summer. And of course, no air conditioning. A little bit brutal for the first 4 days or so. Then it cooled down a little bit. But yeah, after the Pro Tour, hopped off to, I believe we went to Amsterdam initially, went there for a few days, then over to Prague, from Prague over to Germany, went kind of all throughout Germany, then down to Zurich to Austria, effectively back home. Some of the highlights though is I did 24 hours in this place in Germany, the city called Dortmund, because a friend from high school lived there, and he actually brought me to a Borussia Dortmund soccer or football game, and it was absolutely wild. They were lighting flares in this like 80,000 person stadium. Looked like it was about to catch on fire. And we went out, kind of drinking after, and it was just crazy, crazy scene. And yeah, I mean, I was there. I literally got there in the morning, picked from the train station. We went all the way until like 2, 3 a.m. And then I woke up, took the first train out back to Zurich. And oh gosh, what was other highlights? It's all of it was amazing, to be honest. I was really surprised at Vienna. Like in Europe, as you like with a lot of these European cities, there's like an area where there's a couple of beautiful buildings and you go look at them. But in Vienna, it's actually like the entire city. It's just like the highlight that of what other cities would be. It's absolutely stunning, and it's massive as well. I had a friend there who kind of took me around and hosted me, and that was it. It was awesome. And then Switzerland, I think you can't compare to Switzerland. You're in Zurich. It's like one of the nicest cities in the world. It has like a very like this like freshwater lake, almost like Lake Tahoe here in California, or yeah, in California. And then you go 40 minutes out and you're in the most beautiful sort of hiking and mountainous area. And it's honestly unbelievable. The only bad thing is that like Switzerland in general is just crazy expensive. Like basic stuff it's unbelievable. It's like 3-4 times the cost of any other country.
That does sound terrible.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you pay for the scenery there.
100%. So part of your travels and your kind of journey here, I saw a lot of pics on Instagram. You seem to be in pretty good shape these days. You've been spending a good amount of time in the gym on your way to losing close to 100 pounds, if I'm not mistaken. Is that accurate?
Yeah, close to it. I did sort of the classic where I got fit before college, sort of trying to reinvent myself out of high school. I wasn't overweight or anything like that before, but I was just a very skinny kid all throughout high school. So I decided to try to get fit and put on some muscle. I guess I was kind of successful. Played rugby all throughout college, and then post rugby, just gained like, got up to like 260, 270. It's actually not that uncommon from what I understand. It's like people who go through, either whether it's getting like super fit, or you're playing sports in college, then after kind of going on that journey of not playing sports, let's say that. But yeah, down from like 260 down here to about 180 now. Honestly, 80% of it was done in about 3 to 4 months, and then the rest of it took about 2 years. The last bit is really, really tough.
Well, I can definitely speak on the losing it and gaining all the weight part of that. But that is quite the body transformation, and congratulations, because as I was just saying, as someone who is basically the complete inverse of that, I know how difficult that really is. That process did help inspire the FabFit Challenge in July, which was heavily embraced by a lot of the community. You spoke a little bit about your fitness journey, but the response from the FabFit Challenge and your goals. What are your goals in the future, fitness-wise for you and the FabFit Challenge?
It's interesting. I'm not too sure, because I think if we did it, like, it has to be infrequent enough that it's special, but frequent enough that I guess that we keep doing it. Because at least last time, I had no idea sort of the impact it would have. And I was genuinely surprised at how positive it was. I know just in the Arsenal Pass Discord, we had a couple hundred people that were sort of in the intimate group, like talking, updating every day, sort of like what their exercise and what they were eating. And, we had some just incredible transformations at that. There's a relatively popular person in the community named Tebow. I think he not only plays it competitively, he does a bit of content on his own.
Librarian in the Solana, I believe.
Exactly, yeah. And his transformation is absolutely ridiculous. I saw him in Dallas at the SCG Con, and I think he was down. It's either 40 or 60 pounds, something absolutely unbelievable. And yeah, I know he's recently put up a picture sort of like his face only from a couple months ago, and the transformation is just unbelievable. So I think that for me, the idea that I even contributed 1% to that makes it all worth it, right? 1% to
Mhm.
one person's sort of beginning of their journey, it's probably one of the more rewarding things I've ever done, to be honest.
That's terrific. Do you feel like so obviously you spend a lot of time on yourself and your physical fitness. Do you feel the physical work away from Flesh and Blood cards has affected your Flesh and Blood experience, either positive or negatively?
Um, for me, the physical fitness stuff is less about aesthetics and even like kind of like long-term health, although that is like a great side effect. If I'm if I'm not being very physically active, I just tend to become unhappy, and there's almost no way for me to get around it. So I honestly do it to like my main motivation to stay fit is to just kind of it helps my mind rest. And I think when my mind is able to rest a bit, I'm a lot happier. And it's just something I've learned over the years, and uh, I just have to keep at it. And yeah, that's all. It's kind of a weird answer, but that's
No,
honestly
no.
why I do all of it. Is right there. Is just to kind of just for the day to day happiness and calmness. Because without that, I just kind of get a bit cooped up, I think.
Definitely. No, there's a lot of there's a lot of people out there that kind of facetiously throw out, it's like, look good naked, do other stuff, but it really is like a very integral part of like mental health and happiness, right? I mean, it's just it's something that people are most of the time kind of lacking. I'm a big guy. I used to be physically fit. I'm not, and I get that the being unhappy part very much. So I can relate to that, unfortunately. All right, we're gonna pivot away from fitness. We're gonna start talking about some Flesh and Blood. So we're gonna talk about the 800-pound gorilla in the room. You have a reputation as being an extremely hard worker when it comes to tournament prep, and I want to dive into that. But first, in May, Arsenal Pass came to Pro Tour New Jersey with Kano as your deck, a deck that was revealed to be a relatively last-minute audible for the team. That pivot to Kano had ramifications for players that can still be felt today. And for those interested, you can watch or listen to our interviews with the likes of Matt Folks and Michael Hamilton in previous episodes. So hashtag shameless plug, go check those out. Given the power of hindsight, is there anything you would change about the approach the team took in selecting the Kano deck?
Yeah, so it's pretty tough because like Kano in that meta was genuinely quite bad. So we had developed a deck multiple months before to target Viserai. If you remember, I think that was before. What card did they ban in Viserai in Classic Constructor? I think it was Bloodsheath Skelata.
Yep,
Yeah,
Skeleton. Yep.
So it was actually quite good against that Viserai deck because it didn't have access to Spell Void. It played relatively low AB, and Viserai just had sort of this play pattern where they would tend to commit their entire hand towards you, either via the combo or setting up. So once Viserai left the format and Starvo really looked to be, the pick, as well as Chain coming back in, the Kano deck that we had on hand was actually very, very bad. And we pretty much threw it away. So Sasha Markovic comes to Dallas, Texas, about a week before, stays with me. We're testing a lot of Starvo, a lot of Chain, looking like we're going to end up on Chain. It's about that Sunday before we leave. I think we left on the Monday, where we try to tweak a few cards. Basically, we add basically cards that I think face value look pretty terrible, like Voltic Bolt. It's effectively 2 for 6 or 3 for 6 and does nothing else. And we also added Aether Spindle, which is, although the opt is quite powerful, just on the math matrix, also quite undervalued. And they aren't these like multiplicative damage effects that Kano really benefits from. But what we found out is that for the Kano deck to actually be successful, what it needs to do is it just needed to poke the opponent below threshold like 32. Because at 12 resources, at 32, it's a double pump on Wildfire, which is base 32 damage. And that was effectively an OTK. So we just found out we had to maneuver the deck via poke damage effectively. So we started having a bit more success, but it was still really struggling into Chain with Arcane Barrier and Starvo with not Chain with Arcane Barrier, Chain with Spell Void, and Starvo with Spell Void as well. Starvo also has access to Spell Void. So I sort of spiritually just think I'm gonna commit to Kano, leaving that Sunday. Sasha, less committed, probably more serious competitive player. Well, much more seriously competitive player than me, at least in his approach as well. I'm a bit more. I don't know. I kind of like to have fun, so I'm thinking I'm pretty much committed to Kano at this point. We get to Jersey, crank out the decks, get the last reps. Hayden Dale has brought freaking Dash. he thinks he's playing Dash at this point, which is, I'm sorry, but in PT number 1, Dash was a terrible deck to play. So he gets convinced off, and we end up sort of taking that deck. So it honestly very much was a last minute audible, and came from adding what I think on the surface looks like quite bad cards into the deck. And I think that that's what honestly makes Kano so interesting, is that if you look at like the Michael Hamilton theory of Flesh and Blood, and a lot of the guys in New York, like Michael Fang as well, I know they're testing together now. They have a very value-oriented way of addressing the game and sort of breaking it down, really looking at how do I get the most raw number out of my cards, and over a turn cycle have a higher sort of threshold than my opponent. They're honestly looking at like numbers like 14 and 16, right? If you can get 16 out of your turn cycle, you should be ahead of your opponent. And I think that this is quite groundbreaking. You've seen Michael take it to immense success. But at the same time, when you're looking at something like a combo deck or an arcane damage deck, it doesn't exactly work. And I think that Kano was sort of the diamond in the rough there, where we were able to take this sort of more abstract idea of like playing Aether Wildfire and getting Aether Wildfire spell in between Blazing Ether and doing this sort of OTK combo. And we kind of, to do that, you kind of have to throw out the whole idea of this whole math and value idea, because Kano, via that approach, is just such a bad deck. But yeah, definitely was like a sort of last minute audible onto Kano there at PT1.
Brennan, instead of competing, you're now getting ready for casting. You casted most of the Fall Brawl last year, and you're going to be doing it again this year. And you're doing Worlds. Casting events has been something in your crosshairs for some time. And now with people pointing all the way back to your commentary over the Discord Gauntlet as your proof of your ability to do this, how do you get from wanting to cast to getting on the team for Worlds?
So I actually had cast a calling in the past too. It's just it's a little bit of an unknown calling. It was the Blitz calling from, it was probably back in 2020, and it was done virtually. So myself, Sasha Markovic, who was working at Legend Story at the time, and Hayden Dale actually cast this tournament. So I had a little bit of a history with the studio and casting. I think they probably didn't care too much about the gauntlet, but I had recently come off the Ohio tournament. I was able to cast that tournament sort of last minute with Flake and Charmer, which really helped that portfolio. But getting to transferring from a player to a caster, I think it was one of the things I actually always wanted to do. But at the time that I was originally asked to join the casting team, which was back at the first Vegas calling, I decided to turn it down because I felt like at that time I was well positioned as a competitive player to try and become the best player in the world. As arrogant as that might sound, that's just kind of the way that I had approached it in my mind, is like I wanted to try to be the best, and if that's not the case, or I don't have the resources and or time to put in the effort it takes to become that, then I become drastically less interested in it. And back then, I felt like we were on that path. Nevertheless, fast forward a bit, it's much more sustainable for me. What I enjoy fundamentally about Flesh and Blood and about the entire experience is the social experience, and casting is a much more sustainable way to approach that in the long run. And I genuinely enjoy casting.
Nice.
So go
ahead, Pat.
Sorry. Blah, 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 blah. Is casting the long-term plan here? If you had to pick right now, competing out, well, obviously at Worlds right now you're casting, but if you had to pick one or the other, are you a caster?
I think I would choose casting moving forward. there's the time commitment, like the mental commitment and all that to try to be like the competitive player. I don't think that I could sort of just have my toes dipped in to be competitive. Like I said, like it's either all or nothing for me. And also, to be completely honest, I do believe at this point in the game that there is like legitimate talent that is starting to show up where I will have to work a ridiculous amount to kind of put up compete with the likes of Michael Hamilton, Matt Fox, Pablo Pintor. Like these players are genuinely talented at the game. Whereas I felt like I came into this as my first TCG, and maybe through the having a lucky circle of people that I ended up being around with Sasha, Hayden, and just like all the people I've met in Fab, I was able to sort of, I guess, kind of shorten that learning curve. But ultimately, I don't think I can reasonably compete with these super talented players at this point. And yeah, I want this to be something I do for a very long time, and I think casting is the way to do that.
Well, that makes sense. Yeah, we had DM Armada on the show last week, and he was talking about a bit of a unique approach to getting ready. I was curious, do you have, like, going into Worlds, do you have any kind of approach to getting ready for casting? I know you've got Realm Games coming up this week in the Fall Brawl. What's the prep look like for you?
Yeah, so for me, I haven't officially been told what role I'm going to fill, whether it's color or the analytical side. I assume that will be analytical. Comfortable doing both, but I just assume that's where they're going to throw me. So for me, I'm approaching it like I would as if I was playing the event. I don't know if I'm going to do that for every tournament in the future, but I am fully testing. So I play Flesh and Blood for about 2 to 3 hours in the morning when I wake up. And then we have team testing, which is a group of probably like 6. I mean, team being light, it's kind of just a group of people. We test from 3 to 5 p.m. CST, very targeted testing, looking at specific decks, developing game plans, stuff like that. And I'm wholly involved in that. And I will be up until about a week before the tournament, in which I will sort of step back, leave that group, and then kind of use that time to circle around with other teams and other players that are playing the event, and kind of talk to them about their preparation, so I can hopefully bring that to the booth and build more of a story around a lot of these players, which is something that I'm really looking forward to doing. And I think that Flesh and Blood has started to do now, but we can really push that to I don't know, better. I think it will make the viewing experience better for the people watching, is if we can build stories around these players like Michael Hamilton, Pablo Pintor, but even people like, the card guys, the Hyperloops, the Wolf Pack, like all these sort of teams and communities that have come together. So yeah, my preparation for this tournament is actually sort of a full pro testing schedule, and is consisting of about 4 to 5 hours of Flesh and Blood a day.
Now, you mentioned the team testing, which is a targeted testing session. Your other time there, is that spent more kind of broad stroke, getting like a general understanding of what's going on there, or how are you treating that other 2 to 3 hours of testing solo?
Yeah, so it's honestly targeting the way that if I was literally going to be playing the tournament, right? So trying to figure out the best deck, developing the game plans, and sort of tweaking the deck as we go. In terms of what role I will tend to fill the gauntlet deck role more, right? Because I'm not playing the tournament, and I want to have as much experience on as many decks as possible. So it tends to be where I'm going, but at least historically, like in our process, at least in me and Sasha Markovic's process, he tends to be sort of the bright idea brewer coming up with these kind of crazy decks, whether they're combo decks or they're just really bad decks, and then I tend to reel him in and sort of help tweak the deck, look at the game plans, and also make sure we're not playing bad cards. So still very much a deck building aspect and looking to develop the best deck for the tournament. But yeah, if there's ever a question of like, should Brendan be playing this deck or that deck or the gauntlet deck, I should be on the gauntlet deck. So that tends to be where I land.
You talk about as we're coming up on Worlds, how important that kind of character narrative can be to really help the audience through the weekend here. You've hailed GP Richmond 2018 repeatedly as the gold standard for event coverage. Now, in the hypothetical shoes, you're in complete control over worlds, and you have the power to cover any one person in the event. Who are you aiming that camera on the whole weekend?
Yeah, so GP Reduke is interesting because if I'm trying to evaluate like why it's so successful to me, and it is to an extent because we do follow one player, we do follow Reduke, who is sort of the gold standard of communication and professionalism, I think, when it comes to a game of Magic the Gathering. But at the same time, I think that the fundamental thing that makes it awesome is that you have this sort of expanded camera view that looks at, it has a very clear view of sort of the top down gameplay that we're used to, but at the same time, you have next to it, you have this large panel where you can see sort of your protagonist, right? Like your player, and they're mic'd up. And I think that something about that is so charming, and it develops so much empathy between you and the player. When I can hear them talk, when I can hear them go through their players, I can hear the banter on the table. Well, I think that following the single player was relatively important, and we did follow probably the perfect player for that. I do wonder if this model could be used without following a single player, and if it could just be sort of the standard of how sort of, I don't know, the presentation, the coverage would go. Yeah, coverage is what I'm looking for. I wonder if we could do that in sort of a somewhat open field. I don't know how crazy it would be with like random people, or effectively kind of random people being mic'd up, but I really love to hear the players talking, and have this sort of large uninterrupted view of gameplay and player, with commentary doing what I think commentary really is, which is kind of like a light sort of talking of sort of the more analytical things that are gone, maybe a bit of play-by-play, but it's quite light and over the top, right? Instead of being sort of the main focus, and it looks like the gameplay is kind of second. So something about that with GP Richmond 2018, I feel like it was super successful. I've watched that tournament before I even knew how to play Magic, learned how to play Magic via that tournament, and have gone back and watched it back again multiple times. I just think it was an incredible success. If we had to follow one single player, it's tough, right? It's tough. I honestly have no idea. You'd be pretty safe picking Michael Hamilton, that he's going to day 2 and he's going to top 8. So you have that singular character to follow. Matt Rogers, obviously a very good pick. Pablo Pintor, great pick as well. But yeah, I mean, there's even players. I don't know. We sort of have this weird situation where we have, like in Flesh and Blood right now, where we have, I don't know, these players that sit so high up top, right? They're sort of, their achievements are insane. Whether it's Tarek Patel, double national champion, Michael Hamilton basically gets a PTI at every event he goes to, wins almost everything he touches. Pablo Pintor, back-to-back Pro Tour. There's so many choices. It's hard to say, but I think that there's even players that don't fall in sort of that category that would be great to follow. People like Fino Black. I would personally love to follow Dante Delfico because I think he's freaking hilarious. But yeah, there's a ton, and I don't have a specific one that comes to mind or that is sort of the person immediately. But I do think there's a lot of candidates.
It definitely is. And Flesh and Blood seems to be more not necessarily team oriented, but it is. It's kind of turning into, like, I don't know if you follow wrestling too much, but it feels like there's a whole lot of stables being formed at the moment, and I think they're all going to be converging at Worlds. You get Dragon Shield, Wolfpack. There's a whole team, Top Deck Keep with Tyler Horspool, even the Hyperloops, all those coming together in uniform. The Jersey guys, I don't know where's the New Jersey team there. I forget there.
Is it the card guys?
No, there's the card guys. The card guys are based out of, actually, they're like national. There's one, Michael Dalton is on that team. I know that, but I forget what it is. Eye of the Storm, something like that. But there's a few of them, right? There's a few of them that have those jerseys. All right, I digress. Worlds we're going to continue Worlds conversation here. It is looking to be the biggest challenge of the year for players. For obvious reasons, the mix and placement of the 3 different formats being chief among them. How does the player who's going to win Worlds set themselves apart from the pack in this particular setting here in Worlds?
So the theory and the idea is that the best player is the one, right? The person who's the most well-rounded, most talented will win. Strategically looking at it, I think that there is some consideration on how the rounds break out, right? With 5 rounds of blitz being the way that you end, sort of being your breakers 2 top 8. I think that there's some way of there's some sort of risk analysis in what blitz deck you pick. Like for instance, if you're looking at the current blitz meta, let's say that Icelander and Oldhim are the breakout decks, right? I think the Phi was, showed up, it was quite popular, but it was not very good. So let's say Oldhim, Icelander are very good, and one of those is quote unquote the best deck. And it's a bit clear. Well, there's a counter deck that targets both of those, and it's called Prism. But Prism is pretty bad into the aggro decks. So do you take the risk of bringing Prism, which is probably a quote-unquote worse deck than something like Icelander or Oldhim, and try to sort of what we like to colloquially call gem format your way into these good matchups and somehow dodge the aggro decks? My argument would be that, at those rounds, probably not. I don't think it'd be a good idea, but it's still an ongoing discussion. You start out with Classic Constructor. I can't remember. Do you start with Classic Constructor or Blitz?
First 3 rounds of draft.
Or draft, yeah. So starting out draft is always that doesn't really change much, I don't think. I think when it comes to Classic, you still got to kind of pick the best deck. And there's not as much metagaming as there was in some previous formats, I don't believe. Like I felt like there was a lot of metagaming while Prism was around, because Prism was sort of always that nuclear option in case you expected a bunch of Guardians or something like that. But yeah, I think that you want to be very practiced in Uprising drafts. Uprising draft does get written off pretty quickly about whether it's the 14 card packs, it's the Force Phi, or yada yada yada. You want to win the die roll. I think that we've seen throughout the recent tournaments and the big ones that there's more depth to Uprising draft. While forcing Phi is definitely not it's not completely false. It is a strategy. Like we saw Team Dragon Shield heavily favor Jermai, and honestly, it looked like they were forcing Jermai based off the decks that they were drafting, and saw a lot of success. We saw, I think Michael Hamilton played a lot of Icelander. I know my friend Dante played a lot of Icelander to go 6-0 at PT2. That draft format has more depth than a lot of people give it credit for, and I think you want to come prepared. I think the last thing you want to do is sort of write it off as this format where you have no agency and it's just like this this BS where you're just going to try to force Phi. I don't think so, because those draft formats are really important. Those draft rounds are really important. So yeah, draft, definitely circle back to it. Go listen to some of the limited podcasts, whether it's Attack for 20, MNR, stuff like that, to prepare. Bring the best Classic Constructed deck you can. And Blitz, I also think that for Blitz, and I think that Blitz is the one that I put the most thought into. If I was going to that tournament, I would prepare to bring the deck to Blitz rather than the deck that beats the deck.
That's fair. You mentioned that Uprising is kind of written off. Blitz seems to be kind of written off as well in most camps. Did the bans do enough to really kind of slow it down a bit to make it more palatable to the people who hate it? Yeah. So to speak.
A lot of those bans are really good. Like Bloodchase Galata, definitely need to go. Massive Pouncy Links definitely need to go. Storm Shatters in Icelander definitely need to go. Icelander was 100% broken out of its mind when it has Storm Shatters, was probably close to the power level of Combo this. But I do think it's a bit heavy-handed because it also really wrecked Kano. But I do think that Icelander is still the best deck. I do. And I don't think the Storm Shatters did nearly enough. I don't think they even target really what makes that deck super powerful. I guess they stop it from taking, double spelling as when it takes us double turns at the end of the game. But Blitz is a really interesting format right now, I think. I think that Blitz in the past has been looked at as this format where you want to do the most unfair thing possible, right? Like you want to play Reinhardt, win on turn 0. You want to play Combo Fist, win on turn 0 and turn 1. I think in a format where you can't win on turn 0 or immediately on turn 1, it actually flips to the complete opposite, and you want to be playing the most fair deck possible and want to be playing the value deck, right? So that Icelander deck that I play at the Battle Hardened, it's a Michael Hamilton deck. It's his team's deck. Michael Fang lent it to me for the weekend, but it's just about numbers. It's about getting the most value over each side of the turn cycle, right? Whether you're attacking or you're defending, right? Has the sink blows to defend, has the wounded balls to attack. And then at the end of the game, it takes 2 turns. Sorry, a little bit of cough. But that in and of itself felt like the most powerful thing I could be doing in Blitz. Like that deck felt, well, not fundamentally more powerful than anything that my opponents are trying to do. Are people going to be able to answer it? I think probably yes, and they'll develop strategies to do so. But I just want to highlight that idea that if you can't win on turn 0 and you can't win on turn 1, Blitz is actually the format where you want to be doing the most fair thing, and you just want to eke out those +1 or +2s of sort of turn cycle value over your opponent.
If you had the choice or the power to structure worlds however you saw fit, is this how you would do it, or would you do it a little differently?
Nah, classic. I would do classic only. I think that, at least from what I've heard from an overwhelming, if not pretty much every professional player that I've talked to, the idea of dual format tournaments was really cool. And this idea that, you find the most well-rounded player, and that was the ethos behind it, right? I think it's for the most part quite disliked. I could be talking to like a biased group of people, and I could be wrong, but if I was playing the tournament, I would like it to be class constructed only. And this is coming from a player that I like limited. I kind of look at myself as a limited player, and Arsenal Pass was even supposed to be just a limited podcast, but I do think that I would prefer if Worlds was class constructed only. I also think that for coverage, it's much better because people can empathize with the decks and the heroes, and I think the Classic is much more exciting to watch. Where Uprising and Draft, and this is not because it's a bad draft format or whatever. I just think for coverage wise, you'd kind of like when I'm looking at limited content at kind of like a pro event, it kind of just looks like a bunch of cards being slapped at each other. There's not like, oh, this is the old him deck, this is the deck that I know, it's just my hero versus Prism or something like that. So I think that limited kind of loses a bit of that, a bit of what makes coverage exciting.
Now hear me out. Classic constructed all the way through, they get to the top 8. James White just says, put your decks away and go sit down at your table. And then at the table, you just see Ira and 30 cards right in front of you. And the top 8 is determined through the purest form of flesh and blood there is. Welcome, deck mirrors.
Well, if that was the case, Luke Badger might actually be able to compete again, the Ira world champion. But yeah, I mean those decks are kind of fun, to be honest. There's a lot that goes into Ira mirrors. But I would prefer, what's that new Man-Sand format? How about we just do Clash? Clash, yeah.
Clash, I'm actually very excited about Clash. Man-Sand is coming on to the podcast in November. That schedule will be out once I finalize the last couple of guests here. Professor, if you're listening, I'm looking for you. But it is, that tournament's looking exciting. That format is looking pretty exciting as well. The specializations being the kind of specializations and weapons can be any rarity is kind of the, I think, what we needed out of that. Commoner was getting a little Commoner's still a little unbalanced and kind of broken.
Yeah.
A little bit. So definitely be fun. That tournament looks like it'll be fun too. Obviously Ethan is going to be casting that with LSS staff Chris Bewley co-casting that with him. So looking forward to that. So speaking of tournaments where a bunch of people are getting together having fun, the Goliath Gauntlet started this past weekend. I got my own going on there. You are part of the Goliath Gauntlet. Your match has not come on yet. I actually cornered Flake and I go, where are the other? We're missing 2 matches from the opening rounds. It's Folks and Fang, and it's Brendan Patrick versus Majin Bay. And I believe those will be released on Friday. Have you played that game?
Yep. I played that game, and yeah, I don't think I can say the result, but no, I will say I do have some funny stories about it. So basically, me and Caleb, we played our first game, and as you will see, it's an Icelander mirror. It's actually a Bullander mirror. It goes relatively quick. We trade damage a lot. There's a lot of back and forth, and it's just like you can tell we both pretty much never played that mirror. So that game finishes. We turn off our recording software. How about we play another, right? So off stream, we play another. Game lasts about an hour and a half. Is an absolute chess match and a slog, completely different from the original game. Just totally recreationally after, because we learned while we were playing it. We learned how to play that game, because it's not super complicated, but if you've never played it, you don't really understand how the Constellus works, and sort of, trading on Constellus and arcane damage can be extremely inefficient sometimes, how to stack the deck and, potentially set up frost hexes on your opponent, et cetera, et cetera.
Caleb may have been one of the most disrespected players in our preview show there. I think one person picked him over you, but like the consensus was that it wasn't close. But he out of all the ones considered, like he was kind of thrown in with the content creator crowd in terms of like, people coming on to that tournament that maybe didn't represent the best players in the world. The man can play. He's got some street cred behind him. He's qualified for, I believe, both pro tours. Has performed well basically in every tournament that he's played in Flesh and Blood.
Yeah, I played him at his winning in back at the Dallas Calling, the Limited Tales of Wario one. I played him during his winning in there, so he was quite close to top 8ing. And there's something to be said. I think he's one of the best Legends of Runeterra players like in the world. He's genuinely just very good at card games and a threat for sure. And I can bet you one thing: if we were to look at the odds on Caleb versus me and Mansant versus Pintor, I guarantee you that Mansant had worse odds than Caleb does. So we could see upsets across the board.
Mm-hmm. Yes, there was. The one guy I do feel bad about. We'll go through it. I do want to I want to touch on some of these matchups that have happened so far that we can talk about. So first we have Matt Rogers taking it over Yuki Lee Bender. Yuki on Icelander. Matt Rogers bringing the tried and true dash into the matchup. It seemed like it was going back and forth until Yuki, it looks like, tried to set up Insidious Chill, and Frost Hex kind of took a turn off, so to speak. Matt Rogers never let off that kind of tempo gas and just finished the game off. I think he was up 15 points by the time that game ended there.
Yeah. Well, speaking of close games, my favorite close game is actually Isaac Crute versus Hayden Dale. That was a real nail biter.
Oh, it was such a massacre. Did you? How badly did you feel for him after that game? That had to have been. Was he tilted? How tilted was he?
My money was on Isaac, to be fair, but he tells me the story about Isaac. He's like, "Yeah, I just played Isaac Crute. He hits me for 32 damage," and he goes, "Good draw."
That's exactly how I picture Isaac Crute talking. Yeah, Crute over Dale. Dale, the consensus most attractive player in the tournament, according to our expert panel. But alas, a one and done. Crute taking it over Dale. Moving down, we had Hamilton over Longquest. Icelander versus Phi. That one, again, a back and forth affair until Hamilton's Icelander kind of takes over, gets Insidious Chills and Amulet of Ices to really disrupt Phi's game plan, and really just taking it and finishing the game from there. Phi lost a turn, never got it back. Eric Longquist, another game player in the tournament, but not necessarily long for this one here.
Yeah. Hamilton is like the last player I want to play against on Icelander. The dude is just, he's the way he plays Flesh and Blood. He's surgical. That's how I would describe his play style.
Absolutely. I got a feel for Eric going like, yeah, I'll join this tournament. Sure. Just I wonder who am I going to get paired with? Oh, you got to face Michael Hamilton. Oh, okay. Well, I don't have to clear off too much of my schedule, I guess. Next up, we have DM Armada versus Red Zone Rogue. DM Armada bringing Dromai to the tournament. Red Zone Rogue coming in with Dash. Both of them calling their decks a meme deck, so I think I have to have a talk to them about what a meme deck really is. Because the Dromai seem to be pretty, kind of skewed towards the aggro a bit. We're seeing a lot more kind of control-y Dromais out there, but you see those Ravenous Rabbles and Blaze Headlongs keeping the tempo up. Red Zone Rogue bringing that, he called it a meme combo dash, but very, I think, aggro dash in its purest form. Really running the shotgun weapon and just basically everything except he whiffed on one, I believe one boost. He hit a Tome of Findel and stifled his turn. And again, one of those both on tempo. Dash loses it all of a sudden, and that's all it takes is one little stumble off the blocks here to lose some of these matches here.
Yeah, I actually brought a Mimi Icelander deck. It had Wounded Bull in it. It had Insidious Chill.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Like 2 weeks before, probably would have been like, "What the hell are you doing?" That is meme. Of course, we learned far too late that Michael Hamilton just laid it all out there for everyone who wanted to hear on the Manorcast before Nationals. He just broke it all down, and well, he was very transparent, and then everyone's shocked about it, and he's just been.
It's classic Michael Hamilton. I actually have a funny story about that. He came on the Arsenal Pass podcast. Probably a few months ago, but back when people didn't really know that, like, there was an idea that Icelander could beat Oldhim. I was like, yeah, you set up the Frost Axes, but it's a little bit more that goes into that, right? Like, you need the Amulet of Ices and the Insidious Chills, and you're setting up a little bit more, and it's effectively this freezing point sometimes or the double back-to-back Ice Eternals. So Hamilton comes on my podcast, and we're like, hey, can Icelander beat Oldhim? And he's like, yeah, no problem. I was like, oh. Some people say it's not possible. No, you just get Amulet of Ice and Insidious Chill, and then you set up this combo exactly. I was like, oh, awesome. Apparently, he was testing with the Wolfpack at that time, and they had to have a little talk with Michael Hamilton about releasing private info. I just laid out the entire combo, just like, no problem. It was great. It was funny.
Nothing is sacred. Moving on, we have the upset of the century, Ethan Van Sant over Pablo Pintor. This is what it looks like when Levi is doing things right. What a win! What a very interesting. If you actually look at that deck list, it really, I think there's something there. I think Ethan's onto something. He's blinged out to all hell with everything he's got going on. The sleeves, the mat, the blood debt counter, the whole 9 yards. But very sound deck coming in there, and obviously just hit on all cylinders against Pablo Pintor on Viserai.
People don't appreciate how much damage Levi can do. We've actually been playing it in Blitz a bit, and it's generally quite a good deck. That being said, it's not worth. You kind of live and die by Scabbies, which is the hard part with that deck, I feel like. But outside of that, it does a ridiculous amount of damage. I remember there was at one point back in the pre-first constructed Vegas calling, we were actually legitimately testing Leviah in our testing sessions. We were thinking about playing it as a target chain because it did so much damage.
Yeah, and this iteration of it, I know this is. I'm gonna mess up the name. The person who won. He won a nationals with it. He's a Greek player. His name escapes me. But Ethan brought him on to his stream and talked to him about it. And I know this was an iteration on there where specifically the Rouse the Ancients and elimination of like Howl from Beyond really kind of cleans up a lot of those. Some of the problem areas and like the potential for dead hands there. But it's like the threat density is through the roof, and you're basically almost feels I don't know, it feels a little unfair, and it showed against Viserai. I think just a casual 20 to close the game out. Yeah. Without any special things happening there. Talking to Ethan before at U.S. Nationals, he was saying that Levia is good for a loss on killing herself via blood debt 1 in every 5 games with previous iterations. I'm curious to know if this does better than what he was saying there.
I did almost lose to Levia with at Pro Tour number 2, piloted by Van Sant, of course. But yeah, just a ridiculous amount of damage. Luckily I was playing prior, so I was doing unfair things on my side of the board too. But it was a close match for sure.
Last but not least, we have Tark Patel over Tyler Horsepool. It is Phi versus Dromai, and Phi ate Dromai's lunch. It started off fast, and Phi just overtook it. Tyler Horsepool, one of the better players in the world in Flesh and Blood. Another one that got horribly disrespected by the panel. I think he was unanimous picking Patel going into this. Unfortunately for Horsepool, the doctor gets it done there on Phi.
Yep. It's gonna be tough to win with a Dromai versus Phi. It's funny because Tyler could have been potentially pretty well positioned into this into the field, right? But he just happened to go into the Phi round 1, which is a little bit unlucky.
Yeah, we kind of had that matchup circled as a potential. Whoever wins that one has a really good shot of taking the whole thing, given the rest of the brackets as they fell. So still waiting in the wings. Presumably on Friday, we do have Matt Folks versus Michael Fang happening, and of course Brendan versus Majin Bay. So looking forward to that one, or those two rather. Moving on, Arsenal Pass, little known podcast YouTube channel. I hear it might have some potential going on. I think big things are in the horizon. It is staple programming for both on YouTube and as a podcast. You talked about how it started as a limited channel, but was the plan always to bring it right up and be ubiquitous with Flesh and Blood?
I think we always wanted to be successful, but in terms of like all the content we ended up doing and so the breadth of that content was definitely not planned. Was intended to initially be just a limited podcast, and just a podcast at that. So we just ended up moving a lot, pretty heavy into YouTube with gameplay and sort of other miscellaneous videos. We toned that back a bit because the gameplay was a bit taxing, and I don't think it was our core competency, and I don't think it was why we got into it at the first place. I felt like we started to kind of just try to do what we thought our audience wanted rather than what we wanted. So we toned the gameplay back a bit, but yeah, I mean, nowadays it's mostly a podcast, and then we try to do a lot of deck techs, and we try to do a lot of deck techs via bringing other people on. It's just tough. The deck tech thing was a big pivot for us because initially we did it with just us. We really wanted to hit the sort of one a month, but it doesn't feel right, in a way, if like we do a Viscera deck tech that Hayden won nationals with one week, and then the next month it's like, well, I guess we got to come up with a Katsu deck tech or something, because that Viscera deck we put months of work into, right? The Kano deck, that's also something that, there was like a lot of work that went into that. Same with the Chain deck, the one that we run a bunch of Road to Nationals with. Like, those are decks that we were passionate about, and we put a lot of work and effort into. We would stand behind that list and stand behind those guides, right? And if we're trying to hit one a month, it just wasn't really scalable, and there would just be drastic differences in quality if we kind of did them all ourselves. So we've sort of found a solution by bringing on other people, which I think is both good, helps us create relationships with other players, other content creators in the game, and bring other bright minds onto the channel. It's actually it's one of my favorite things to do now, is bring sort of these specialists to come on and talk about the deck. So it's Michael Hamilton with Old Tim, you got Tyler Horsepool with Prism, Tarek Patel with Phi, et cetera, et cetera. So but to answer the question, Arsenal Pass definitely was not the plan. I'm very grateful and humbled by the success that we've had. It definitely brings a lot of purpose to my life, which I think that I hope I never take that for granted, because it's it means a lot.
Absolutely. You talk about how you kind of shifted primarily over to the deck techs on the YouTube there. How does it feel knowing that you guys have the sway to tangibly affect the landscape of the meta when you do in fact publish a deck tech or recommend a specific card? Is that something that weighs on you in your own prep for events? And are you afraid of the Tarek knickknack type situation occurring?
So what's funny is that we actually had that situation come up, but it was a bit different, right? So there was at one point, I had played the Calling Dallas, and I was drafting like a tall Lexi deck. It was criminally underdrafted. It was quite good against this sort of like force Oldhim strategy. And yeah, a lot of people were trying to force Briar. Ice was kind of underappreciated because even the Oldhim decks would go heavy into Earth as well. So there was one podcast where we did that. Hayden was like, "Oh, what did you draft?" It turns out like the weekend after that, I was in another limited calling, and I was going to probably force this deck again. And so at the time, I was like, "No, I don't want to say." So while I wasn't giving away bad information, like telling people to force Briar or force Oldhim or just something like that, I did say I didn't want to say it. Because I didn't want to just give people that I was potentially drafting against in the later portions of the tournament or in top 8 to just know the archetype that I was potentially getting into. So we did get a little bit of flack for that. It kind of turned around, but that was sort of our own knick-knack brick-brack situation. Happened quite a while ago, and I think from there, while I don't think that I did anything wrong, I do think that it was overly cautious, and it was probably not the right approach to take. But I will say it did give us an appreciation to strongly avoid situations like that. I genuinely mean it when I say we try to say the most honest things possible on the podcast. While we might not come on the podcast and say, "Hey, we're bringing Kano to the Pro Tour tomorrow. Pack your Spell Void." We'll say, "Yeah, I think we're going to play sort of a more unknown deck, or we're not going to play Chain, or not going to play this. But in our opinion, Chain is a very good deck. Starvo is incredibly well positioned. Like if you're bringing that to the tournament, I think that you're making a good choice, et cetera, et cetera." So I think we just try to stay away from absolutes, saying this or that is the quote unquote best deck. We try to say things that we fundamentally believe are true. And I genuinely can say, with 100% honesty, we've never tried to like mislead anybody via our podcast. We have been wrong though, and that's the tough part. Is by being wrong on that podcast, people will accuse you of that, and that's just the nature of the beast. So we try to avoid that by just not talking in absolutes. But yeah, we could be wrong, and that happens all the time.
And a shout out to Tarek. I don't want to give the impression that we're saying that Tarek misrepresented with knick-knack, but when the opportunity to give him shit about that arises, kind of just take it and run with it.
So our little anecdote is like our strategy for Team Dragon Shield is whatever deck Tarek puts up on the CFB. I love Tarek, by the way, but I'm just gonna talk. I'm gonna do a little joke. Whatever deck he puts up on CFB, we just check it off our list of which one he's not playing. To his credit, he had posted a Dromai list on CFB not too long ago, coming into US Nets, and we're in a test server that gets very hero centric. We have some of the best Dromai players in the world are in that server. And when that list came out, right, the initial reaction at that point was like, here he goes. And he had put in the Toma Findels in that one, and it was starting to get like a very harsh reaction initially. Fast forward about 2 weeks, right? The article's been posted. The Dromai players have miraculously engineered their deck into something that carried almost card for card what he had posted on CFB, and they were running it all over the place come US Nationals. But that, like, specifically that tome was like, this isn't a red card, right? This isn't great for that, but ends up being it's a really great card in that deck. And ahead of the curve. Turns out he's really smart and knows what he's talking about sometimes. Yeah, I got a lot of flack back in the early days of Chain for saying on the podcast that you couldn't fatigue the deck and that Snag was a bad card. And it took about 4 consecutive Road to Nationals wins for people to actually be like, oh, he's not going to lie to us. But yeah, I mean, that's just going to happen. It's like, I think it's just the nature of the beast. And all you can do is try to be as honest as possible and be careful not to, say things like this is objectively correct or that is objectively incorrect or something like that. It's tread lightly, but ultimately it just comes down to honesty.
That's an excellent message. Arsenal Pass is it's as big as we get here in Flesh and Blood in terms of content. What are your big plans for the channel coming into rounding out 2022? And if you have anything in the works for 2023?
Yeah, so I think we're pretty happy with where the channel is. I think Flesh and Blood has, in terms of content, has seen a bit of a decline recently, whether it's set fatigue or just sort of the time in between sets, and seeing a bit of a lull. Dynasty coming out, when it's coming out, is maybe going to be rough. It's after the World Championships, and it's also sort of around that holiday season. So we haven't been seeing tremendous growth with the channel, but I think we're content with what we're doing with it, right? Which is mostly the podcast, and then doing this sort of high level competitive deck techs, with either ourselves, which we'll probably do on our Worlds deck, or with other players that are willing to come on and do that with us. The one thing I would like us to expand into, but it's just really tough, and I've been searching for someone to help us with this, is basically into YouTube Shorts. So I don't know if any of you have YouTube on your iPhone, but if you do, you probably understand the sort of crack that is YouTube Shorts, right? Like, I can hardly watch a YouTube video anymore, and I have to actively sort of prevent myself from going into the app and just scrolling. They're effectively TikToks, right? So it's this shorter, less than 60-second video form of content that is usually content that's ripped from a YouTube video that gets put on Instagram Reels, Facebook effectively Reels, YouTube Shorts, TikTok, and just other. It's so effective, and it's extremely clear that a lot of massively successful rising podcasts are utilizing that to great effect. And I would like for us to be able to do that. Unfortunately, we just need to find an editor to help us do it, and it's actually quite challenging to find someone who's economical enough and can achieve that. But I would like to expand into that sphere. That's sort of TBD to see if we can do it.
You mentioned YouTube Shorts. I do have to shout out Brewtapcast, who has been doing a card a day, Flesh and Blood YouTube Short every day without missing a beat. He is on day 289. And he is nothing but consistent with those. That might be I honestly don't know what else is happening with the channel, but to your point, I do know that he is posting those YouTube Shorts like a menace. I'm a TikTok guy, and I get lost in those shorts, and then I forget that it's not TikTok. I start getting frustrated because the format's a little different, like in terms of like the user interface, and I'm like, what's wrong with my TikTok? And it's like, I went down the rabbit hole. God damn it.
Yeah. Every time I go to watch not every time, but often when I go to watch a YouTube video on my phone, I get sucked into shorts. Like, they're powerful, and there's some sort of dopamine interaction there that is just criminal in how effective it is. And yeah, I think that like content is actually moving in that direction. Although it's kind of depressing, like it's so effective. Like, you see all the major podcasts just like double, triple down on this kind of content where they're ripping out like, just interesting, shorter conversations or kind of like shock like lines and responses, and they're putting them on shorts, and we're just seeing like some of these podcasts blow up over it.
You writing that down, Adam? We gotta get on shorts.
Yeah, I'm already thinking about how I can edit that.
Yeah, right. It's like, how can we make this work? Not to talk too much shop. I was actually it's something I was actually thinking about as well. I think we might. I can talk next week guests and all that kind of crap on it, and use it as a kind of announcing vehicle.
you seen Team Covenant started doing it. So I remember Team Covenant posted about like, so I don't know if it was like a quarterly or like a yearly thing. They had a bit of a retreat where they were developing new strategies on how to grow their audience without sort of selling out. Team Covenant's pretty big on that. And now they post shorts all the time, and it's like Steven or Zach and that little side camera is like, by the way, guys,
right.
It's really effective. It's,
It does. It endears Steve to me. He seems to check out from Flesh and Blood every once in a while, but then he gets on that little side camera. All right. On our way to wrapping things up, kind of non sequitur. What is something that people might not know about you that you'd like them to know? Guests in the past have used this to talk about movies they like, video games, food, hobbies, a hidden talent, whatever. No limits here, but something unknown that you'd like known.
I don't know if it's something that I would like known, but it is something that's just a little bit bizarre, or it's just unusual. And so I spent, basically when I was about like 15 years old, I went to boarding school, which is not the interesting part. But after that, I started doing a lot of this like kind of weird traveling. So my idea of sort of leisure and travel is I just pick my life up for about 2 to 3 months and just go move somewhere completely new and just live there, not really knowing anything, but usually trying to know about one person. So I've lived for these periods of 2 to 3 months. I've lived in Thailand, Istanbul, Turkey, Moscow, Russia, and kind of all throughout Southeast Asia as well. And I did that mostly through my college years, a bit in high school, and then a bit after, before I was sort of replanted back in Texas because I had some medical stuff come up. But that was sort of the thing that I used to do, is I would go just move to Russia for 3 months, live in Moscow. And I don't know anything. I don't know any Russian. I barely know any Russian people. My family is from sort of suburbia, Texas, and it was just like, something about that was really attractive to me, to just get as far away as possible and just being like the most unique kind of cultural situation, right? And just live. So yeah, I did that a lot, and it's still something that I want to get back to. And that Euro trip was kind of like that, right? It was about a 5-week trip, sort of gallivanting through Europe. And yeah, something about that to me is like, I feel like in my life, that's where I've done most of my living. Most of my living with the apostrophe.
Feel that. I feel that.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. We did it. I thought that we did that. That was actually that was smooth, is what it was. Other than my little hiccup on the question there. But this is now the time where you can plug your stuff. Plug whatever you got. Give me your socials. Give me all the links you got.
Sure. The only social I give out is probably my Twitter. I'm at BrendanAPG. I tweet every now and then. Sometimes I do Twitter Spaces with Mr. Nick Neckerberg himself, Tarek Patel. Obviously, Arsenal Pass, I co-host with Hayden Dale. It is a sort of a podcast, I guess, that focuses on the competitive side of the game. We have a YouTube channel as well. We do a lot of deck techs on upcoming decks, deck guides, specialists, people like Michael Hamilton, Tarek Patel, Tyler Horspool. So check that out if that's something you're interested in. And yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to come on this podcast. It's been a great time. It was a great conversation, and I wish you all the most success moving forward. Hopefully, you move into shorts and you absolutely just crush Arsenal Pass, because we can't adapt and get into shorts ourselves.
But we do consider Arsenal Pass is basically our number one influence in starting the podcast. So in a way, you're kind of like our dad. So thank you very much for coming on, Dad. I appreciate everything that you guys have done for us and influenced us. Not a problem. Now we're gonna plug our stuff, Adam. Right? This is the time where I do this. Excellent. You can find us on YouTube at the Combat Chain Podcast. You can find us anywhere you're streaming audio podcasts, wherever you consume that audio. We're on all of the platforms. You can find us on Twitter at the Combat Chain. You can find myself at Pat Smashgood, and you can find Adam at Fomtoolery TCG. Now, Brendan, we have one more piece of business before we close out. We ask every guest to participate in our little outro here, and so we're going to ask you to also participate. I am going to say until next week, and then in unison, we're all going to say we're closing the combat chain, nice and hammy. Is that something you can do with us?
I can try.
Excellent, excellent. All right. Thanks again to Brendan Patrick for coming on to the combat chain. It has been a real pleasure. And Adam, I think that is going to do it for us. So until next week, we're closing the chain.
Glorious.
Thank you, Brendan Patrick.
Yes, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you all. That was a great conversation.